The DJI Osmo Pocket 3 has a unique concept and a great image sensor, but it's not a camera that is suitable for everyone. It has a few major weaknesses that you should definitely be aware of. Today I'll tell you what I personally consider to be its 10 biggest flaws. To make things complete, I'll also tell you at the end what other users are complaining about. What probably surprised me most about the Pocket 3 is that it has a number of significant limitations when it comes to recording vertical videos in portrait mode. Although there are several ways to switch to portrait mode on the Pocket 3, the gimbal does not rotate the camera sideways as you are used to with a smartphone gimbal. Instead, the portrait mode is simply a vertical crop of the image. The Osmo Pocket 3 probably has a sensor in a 4:3 format. As a result, the viewing angle of the vertical crop is slightly wider than if the 16:9 image were simply cropped vertically. But the field of view in portrait mode is significantly smaller than that of the landscape mode in the 16:9 format. The crop also means that the resolution of 4K is no longer possible. The highest possible resolution in portrait mode is 3K. This is usually sufficient for social media, but the reduced field of view is a disadvantage, especially when vlogging. And that's not all. The Pocket 3 has its own recording modes for slow motion recordings or for recordings in poor lighting conditions, so in low light. However, both modes do not support the portrait mode, so not even the low light mode, which is quite a disadvantage, because you should also use the low light mode indoors in artificial light. To solve all these problems, you could of course always hold the camera sideways, but it's clear that this is not an ideal solution for vlogging, for example. And that brings us to the second topic, vlogging. Initially, I thought the Pocket 3 would be the perfect vlogging camera. The display, the gimbal and the tracking make it an interesting solution for vloggers. But the limitations of the portrait mode are not the only disadvantage for vloggers. The focal length of the main lens is often a little too long for vlogging, especially if you hold the camera in your hand and don't mount it on an additional pole. A slightly wider field of view would often be more suitable. Although the additional lens is wider, it is extremely small, easy to lose and causes distortions that cannot be corrected in camera. And there are further disadvantages. The gimbal is a little too slow for fast movements in the standard settings and often lags a little behind when you film yourself. The blurred background looks absolutely cool and high quality, but is it always the right choice for vlogging? You have to constantly make sure that the right subject is in focus, otherwise you won't be able to use the shot. This can slow down the whole workflow and is not always suitable for a quick and uncomplicated vlog. The camera usually focuses on the closest subject, which may not always be the right one. In addition, the display is too small for you to always be able to correctly judge the focus. But of course you can keep yourself in focus using Active Track, for example. And I like the Active Track feature, but it also has its flaws. Active Track automatically keeps you in the center of the frame, and that can be very useful, especially if you're filming yourself. But even if you have set the framing optimally and your face is in the upper third, as it should be, Active Track will automatically move your face back towards the center. You then have to correct this each time using the joystick. Or you can use dynamic framing, but this can be a bit cumbersome. And neither the intelligent gimbal modes like dynamic framing nor Active Track are supported in low light mode nor in slow motion mode. At least not if you want to take slow motion shots in 4K. And the slow motion mode could be great for action shots. But as you can see here, you should always be aware that the Pocket 3 is not an action camera. Both focus and stabilization have difficulties here. And there are a few more things you should know about the stabilization. The stabilization of the Pocket 3 normally works well and can also keep up with the stabilization of an action camera. However, there are limitations. Especially in combination with tracking, the stabilization gets into trouble and the shots look shaky very quickly. I took the same shot here without tracking and the result is much better. As I said, despite the gimbal, the Pocket 3 is not an action camera and you will achieve much better results with an action camera in situations like this. And the gimbal has another peculiarity that you should definitely be aware of. A smartphone gimbal like the Flow here can rotate horizontally almost completely around its own axis. The range of movement of the Pocket 3 on the other hand is somewhat more limited. But that's not the problem, because the difference is not too great. What is somewhat unusual, however, is that the range of movement depends heavily on the direction. If you turn the gimbal to the right, you can make more than half a turn. To the left, on the other hand, the Pocket 3 only has a very small range of movement. This is unusual and you should be aware of it, because if you let the camera film and track you and then move to the left, so in the wrong direction, the camera will very soon no longer be able to follow you and will quickly lose you. And the Pocket 3's gimbal has another very obvious disadvantage. Like any other gimbal, it makes the device very sensitive to water or dirt, or even sand. This means that although the Pocket 3 can be a cool travel camera, you should not use it in the rain. You need to be very careful when taking shots on the beach. Contact with water, or even if you drop it in the sand, could quickly lead to total damage. And it is also very sensitive for another reason, the display. When I used the Pocket 3 for the first time, I was really excited about the rotating display. The fact that you can switch the camera on and off with it is actually a very clever concept. However, the display looks very thin and plasticky and not as robust as the flip-up display on the Ace Pro, for example. Can you hear that? The display definitely makes the camera vulnerable. You shouldn't handle it too roughly. In fact, there are several users who have complained that the display no longer locks into place correctly. However, I don't want to complain about this because my Pocket 3 doesn't have this problem. And the hardware has another weak point. The Pocket 3 has a fixed internal battery. You cannot simply replace it when the battery is empty. Yes, of course, you can get a battery handle or even several of them to extend the battery life. But one costs around $70. And even more important is the fact that a failure of the internal battery can lead to total failure of the device. So you have to hope that the internal battery lasts a long time. I have read a few comments from users who have complained about the weak colors of the Pocket 3. I can't confirm that. Overall, I am a fan of the colors of this camera. They look cinematic and very appealing to me. What doesn't always turn out well, however, are the skin tones. Especially when the sun is shining in your face, the skin tones sometimes look very pale, such as here in the evening sun. I made a detailed comparison with the iPhone 15 Pro Max, and the iPhone often produces better skin tones. Yes, of course, you can correct this in post, but it's still a clear weak point for me. For color corrections, D-Log M would be well suited, but in the case of D-Log M, the exposure is no longer optimally oriented to the face. It's therefore not particularly suitable for vlogging. Especially in backlit situations, it results in underexposed shots. D-Log M is also not available in low light mode, although I would advise against using it in low light anyway. I know from a lot of feedback on my action camera tutorials that many users like to use the same camera for photo and video. For example, many also like to use the action camera for photos. And while many action cameras, just like many smartphones, are now able to take high-resolution photos, this is not the case with the Pocket 3. Although the large sensor and the nice colors make it possible to take good photos with the Pocket 3, they have a maximum resolution of 9 megapixels, which is a bit low these days. As long as you don't want to crop or print the photos, it's not a big problem, but it's an advantage to have a bit more resolution if necessary. But I think photography has probably only played a minor role when designing this camera, which is a bit of a pity. Before I get to my last major weakness, I'd like to point out a couple of issues that have been raised by other users but haven't affected or bothered me personally. Several have complained that the Pocket 3 was not reliable, that it kept hanging up for no apparent reason, or would not turn on even though fully charged. Personally, I've not had these experiences. My Pocket 3 has always worked perfectly. Unlike a smartphone gimbal, however, it's not well suited for use in underslung mode. It's simply too small for that, and you have to bend down hard. While it can be connected to the DJI Mic 2 without an additional receiver, this does not apply to the DJI Mic 1. This is not a problem for me either, as I don't own the DJI Mic 1. The Osmo Pocket 3 is mainly marketed as a consumer camera that is small and handy. However, neither is really the case. Although it's not too big and is called Pocket, it's rather unsuitable for a trouser pocket. It's a bit too long for that, and you should always store it in such a way that the gimbal is well protected. And it's not a simple consumer product either. I think that the Osmo Pocket 3 is a very interesting product, unique in this form. However, it's not particularly suitable for a beginner who wants to take quick and easy family or travel videos from time to time. Not only is it very expensive, it's also a little too complicated to use. Not only do you have to operate the camera as such, but also the gimbal and ensure correct focus at the same time. This could quickly overwhelm someone who has little experience with cameras. A gimbal in particular requires some experience for good results. This device is therefore more suitable as a B-cam for an experienced creator than as a casual camera for the family. You can find a complete and updated tutorial on all the features of the Pocket 3 on my channel. Check it out if you want to know more about the features of the Pocket 3. With this video, I didn't want to put the Pocket 3 down, because despite everything, I like this camera and especially the look it creates. And if you can live with all the weaknesses I've mentioned, I think it's an excellent camera. So what do you think? You can find a link to current offers for the Pocket 3 in the video description, and give me a like as feedback if you found the video useful. There will be more videos about the Pocket 3, so stay tuned and see you next time.